Welcome, my friends, to Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm DC Gomez, and I'm thrilled you're joining me today for a fun conversation with a passionate author. We're kicking off the program, like it's our tradition, with a short reading from the feature book. I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get started.
My name is Brian Daldorph. My book is called Words is a Powerful Thing, 20 Years of Teaching Creative Writing at Douglas County Jail. And it's an account of my teaching a creative writing class at the jail since 2001. And it's a story about what happened in the class and some of the characters I met there. And in the book, I share the writing of more than 50 of the incarcerated writers that I worked with. What I like to do in talking about the book to begin with is to read some of the writing from the writers that I worked with at the jail over the years. So I'd just like to read 6 or 7 short passages so that you can hear what some of the guys were writing about. The first one. When you arrive, read the sign. Leave all hopes and dreams behind. Forget all you have or had in the free world. It no longer matters. It will only distract you, and you'll become prey to the lions in this jungle. Trust no one. Everyone is out for something in this cutthroat society. After so long in here, and so many hours upon days, upon weeks locked in a cell, the more claustrophobic I've become. It's a mental challenge every time I step through that door and they think I'm trying to be defiant. I watch as time slowly chews away on men's sanity, where confusion reigns supreme. Soon now the jail awakens to do its time. It seems better at that than we. I think it's because the cold walls got timed down because they know they will never be free. I fail at most everything until my pen unwinds. Words unveil through mists of time in my mind. I may not shine or even get what's mine, but when these words come together, they're one of a kind, my little mark in the world. So in teaching this class, I saw very clearly the significance of making art, in this case poetry, as a lifeline, a way of surviving the tough circumstances that all inmates find themselves in. And the class validated my belief in the making of art as a personal and social good, a truly transformational activity. And some of the things that teaching this class for over 20 years taught me, that poetry can help to keep someone's head above the dark, cold water, even when confined to a small, stark room for many hours of every day. That poetry is a beautiful gift that anyone can receive and make use of, requiring only the simplest tools and a commitment to telling the truth in language. That poetry can bring diverse people together in glorious ways, so we do not have to face all our challenges alone. That for those of us trying to come to terms with ourselves, striving for self-improvement, poetry gives us a way that we can make use of at any time. And then just to set the work that I did in context, I taught my class at a jail in Lawrence, Kansas, Douglas County Jail, and that is one of over 3,000 jails and almost 2,000 state and federal prisons that make up the huge American corrections system. And most people estimate that there are approximately 2 million people incarcerated at the present time in that system. And what I was doing was just trying to make the system better for some of the people who were stuck in it, and to give them an opportunity to maybe make a better life for themselves when they were eventually released. One of the inspirations for my work was the work of Jimmy Santiago Baca, who is really one of the most prominent contemporary poets, who was formerly incarcerated. And this is what he said about the massive correction system in the US at the moment. We are all connected to a national madness that absurdly expects prisoners to change for the better as we deep freeze them in 6x9 cells and torture them in inhumane environments. We seek to reduce crime while we do everything in our power to create it. And Baca then argues for the worth of inmate writing programs that he believes can bring about substantial changes for the better, as happened in his own situation. Baca says that through the redemptive act of writing, inmate writers announce to the world beyond the walls and bars that a spark of life still burns in them. Through writing, they might become meaningful human beings in a society that had branded them as nothing more than worthless criminals.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Inside the Minds of Authors. I am delighted you guys are joining us today. I have an incredible guest with an amazing passion, not just a book, but a calling that I want to share. So, good morning, Mr. Brian. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity.
I am thrilled you're joining me. Thank you so much for sharing. This is a piece that you had me in goosebumps since you started reading, and it's such an incredible work. I want us to dig into it. What made you decide to put it together? I want to start with that, and then we're going to go down your career and why you did it.
So I had been teaching at the jail for about 15 or 16 years. I began in 2001, and I had collected just a large amount of writing from the incarcerated writers that I worked with. I published one anthology of their work in about 2009, but then I wanted to write a kind of fuller account of the class and what it meant to those of us who were involved in it. And I wanted to share some of the writing of the writers that I worked with. And that all came together in this book, which I began in about 2017, and I finished a full draft of it in about 2 years or so. And it's really an attempt to write an account of what this class did and what it meant to the people who were involved with it.
When you started working with the class, what made you decide to take that career field?
Well, it just seemed to me that because of everything that I had gained from writing in my own life, that it just seemed to be something that could really help people who were in a bad situation, as the guys were that I worked with at the jail. And really, after doing this work for 20 years, I think that idea really proved itself to be true, because I think there's so much that you can gain from writing, even if you are in a pretty desperate situation.
How did you get started as a teacher in a jail? Was it hard to actually come in and say, hey, I have this proposal, or did they contacted you? How did that happen?
That's a great question. So I met a guy at a party actually who worked at the jail as the program's director, and he was very progressive and very keen to kind of do some interesting things at the jail. And he developed a library there, and he developed a lot of programs. And we talked, and I had this idea about teaching the class, and it really developed from there. And he would sit in on the class because he was very interested in literature and the opportunity for the inmates to write. And so we worked together on the class for a number of years before he retired. That was really my way into the system. And what I would say, if anybody else is considering doing this, then it really helps to have an insider who can help sort of get you through the bureaucracy of the jail so that you can do something like this.
That is one of those things. You're looking at a federal institution that has a lot of red tape to be able to come in and do something so powerful. I'm blown away. How many people do you normally had in your classes?
So when we began the class, we decided that we would let everybody come to the class. So we would have sometimes 20 or more in the room. We found out that was a bit unwieldy. And so we tried to cut it down to guys who were genuinely interested in the class and really wanted to write. And so we cut down to about maybe 12 or 15, which I think anybody who has taught a creative writing class knows that that's a pretty good number, about 12 or 15. So we tried to keep it at that for the most part.
So each course, tell us a little bit about it. Did they stay there for 6 months or can they just come anytime? Did you have the same people?
So the thing about a county jail is that the population is very fluid and people come and go all the time. And so the class would really change from week to week. Though we had some guys who would be there for months at a time, it was always uncertain because they would get released or they would get moved on to another institution. So it was always very uncertain about who would be in the class every week. And then sometimes guys would leave the class because they'd be released or they'd go off to prison or whatever. And then we might see them again a year later when they got back into the system.
Once they started writing, because you have a very intimate relationship in terms of teaching them how to write, putting it together, how was the process for the prisoners? How did they feel trying to bring these stories to life?
Yes, that's a really good question. I think for a lot of the guys that we worked with, this was quite a new idea. They hadn't really done this before, but as you can imagine, they had real stories to tell. And I think what the class could do was just give people the opportunity to write and the encouragement to tell them that what they had done in telling their story was kind of valid and important and significant, not just for them, but for people around them who wanted to hear these stories.
The very first piece you read was very much from the soul. There was no editing that could have brought those words together in terms of like, forget the past, forget the real life. This is a brand new world that he's talking to. When you brought those pieces, how much did you help them to bring those truths to the paper?
For the most part, I didn't do much editing, and I have worked as an editor, so I know sort of how to do that, and I know how to kind of bring out the best in the people that I'm working with. But for the most part, the material that I use in the book of the writing by the guys in the class, I didn't really edit. So the voices that you hear were pretty much as they were written in the class.
So, switching gears from the people in the class to you, how was this process for you? Because you're listening to some raw stories that can break somebody. How did you protect yourself to not fall apart every time you were teaching?
I think because we all realized, those of us who were involved in the class, that what we were doing was something really important and meaningful. And it was giving guys the opportunity to write their stories and to come to terms with their lives and, hopefully kind of move in a better direction. And we saw that happening with quite a number of the guys that we worked with. So, yes, it was painful. And we had a lot of guys who would break down in tears as they told their stories. And these were tough guys. They didn't quite easily, but things that they were saying were just so significant to them that they would sometimes cry in the class. But I think we all realized that they were saying some really important things that also, as you can imagine, would resonate with the other guys in the class because quite often their stories were to some extent quite similar. So I think that they really appreciated it when somebody told the truth about his life and other guys in the class could relate to it in many ways.
It is a certain level of vulnerability and openness that comes with writing, especially when you're telling your truth. They're all writing
Absolutely.
nonfiction. So
Yes.
you brought something very unique for them and made them seem and know that they were heard and seen. Because sometimes I think some of our systems in the US makes people feel as it's just another piece. It's just another like widget in the system and forget that you're human. So that's very powerful.
Yes, it is, because I think that one of the things that happens especially in the correction system, which I think most people know about, is that it's a very dehumanizing system. You're given a number. You're not treated as a human being for the most part. And I think one of the things that the guys valued in the class was that they were considered important as individuals and important as storytellers.
That is huge. Very often we forget that the system is designed to make you one of many and to kind of just, in theory, supposed to rehabilitate. I don't know how well we rehabilitate, instead of just dumping people into these bizarre situations that I'm not sure how they're healing. I love what you have brought to the table in putting these stories together. How long did it take you to put them together? Let's get back now in the pieces of putting the book itself together.
I mean, by the time that I was writing the book, I had taught in the system for about 15 or 16 years. And I think all of that, everything, every moment of that comes into the writing of the book. So even though I wrote the book over maybe a 2-year period, I think everything that I'd done with this work had to go into writing that book. And of course, in writing the book, I went over every word 1,000 times to try to get it right. It was important work. It was important to try to say it in the best way that I could.
You have curated an amazing piece of work that took a lot of time and effort, which is very impressive, just blown away by your love for it. When you decided to publish it, what is it that you want readers to take out of this anthology? What are you hoping they will get?
I think a lot of things. One of the most important things was something that I do feel very strongly about. That I think that we should realize that people who are incarcerated are really just like us, and they could be any of us. I think we've all made mistakes in our lives. I certainly have, that could have gotten me into the system at some point. I think that's really important because I think people in the system, they just feel like they're sort of cut off from life and that people really don't care about them anymore. One thing I wanted people to see in the book was that people who are in the correction system have, I mean, they're just like us and they have to deal with the same issues that we do. It's just that everything is sort of intensified because of their situation. So that was really important. But I think also there is a level of really fine literature here. I mean, poetry is really good and it says important things to all of us about family and identity and key issues that we all have to address. So I think it's not just a book for people who are sort of interested in the prison system, but it's also a book about people trying to live the best lives that they can and trying to work that out through what they were writing in this class.
It's people talking about people issues just in a different situation. So I am truly grateful you brought the words together. Are you working on anything else now?
So one of my colleagues in teaching the class was formerly incarcerated, and he was allowed back into the jail as an instructor. And unfortunately, he died in March 2021. His health was very bad. And so I am now editing a collection of his work, which will be published posthumously. And that's the most important project that I'm working on at the moment.
I'm so sorry for your loss, but thank you for carrying on his work.
Well, yes, it was really important. He had a lot to say to us, and I was just so determined that that would not be lost. Because I think he really had important things to say to all of us.
I appreciate it. Those words definitely cannot be lost. So I appreciate you doing the work. So tell me, Mr. Brian, what message would you give an aspiring author, an aspiring creator, if they were trying to get into this field? What would you tell them?
I think that writing is important however you do it. I mean, it has brought me so many benefits in my life, not just publications or whatever. That's just one part of it, but just the business of writing, the telling of your own story, finding a language for what you have to say, trying to talk about difficult things that if you don't talk about, then they probably get even worse. I think just the significance for writing, and I think in all of my teaching at college level too, I just tried to emphasize to everybody that the most important thing I think is kind of a personal thing, just how much of a blessing writing can be for all of us in whatever situation we find ourselves.
To our listeners, that is such a beautiful and powerful message. I appreciate it. Thank you. Mr. Brian, where can our listeners find you, where they can learn more about the book?
So the book was published by the University of Kansas Press and it's available all over the place. It's on Amazon, of course. and the University of Kansas website. So it is easily available. And I hope that people will find meaning in it, because I just think it does have some important things to say to everybody, I'd suggest.
Sounds great. So before you leave us, and I love this conversation, and thank you for taking the time to come to us and share it. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Sure.
Easy peasy. Don't think too hard on this. Let's see how you do. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Nice. Breakfast or dinner?
Both.
Nice. I'm a brunch kind of girl, so yes. Pirate or knight?
Pirate, I think.
Me
I've always
too.
liked pirates.
Me too. City or mountain?
Mountain for sure.
Great. Here's a little different one. Let's see where you take us. If you could be any Disney villain, who would you be?
Disney villain. It's a great question. Well, I mean, I don't want to be Cruella de Vil, but I've always thought that Cruella de Vil is quite wonderful. So that she comes to mind.
There's a lot of personality in Corella. Love it.
There is. There is.
Mr. Brian, do you have any closing remarks for us?
Well, if I could just read a poem by my friend, a short poem, that's what I would like to finish with.
Yes, please.
This is by my friend Antonio Sanchez Day, and it's called A Poet's Heart, and it means the world to me, this poem. A Poet's Heart. Lines composed on writing paper, comprised of words scribbled on various pieces of paper. Scrap paper, court papers, jailhouse request forms, receipts, even napkins, depict the legacy of this wounded heart that, despite its constant anguish, still pumps life. A heart that beats to the rhythm of Mother Earth's drums. A heart that flashes like lightning across the darkest skies. A heart that burns with desire and does not extinguish in the hardest of rains or strongest of winds. A heart with the insatiable hunger of this starving artist. A heart that was once frozen, that now flows like streams into rivers, into oceans, into the sea of life. This heart is the heart of the poet.
That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing with us. To our listeners, please go ahead and check out this incredible collection. You are going to be moved and touched and be able to reflect on your own journey, Mr. Brian. Thank you so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for the good work that you do.
Oh, thank you. It has been such a pleasure. To our listeners, if you're interested in watching the video recording of this, make sure to check out the link below. Make sure to sign up for the Patreons. Podcast Lover is going to be there. You get an inside look, unedited conversation. In case you're interested, go ahead, help us support the podcast and share the journey. In the meantime, give us a like, share the podcast, tell a friend. You know, we're always better when we're doing this together. Mr. Brian, have an amazing day. And to everyone, I will see you again in our next podcast. Bye.